Landlords of rent-controlled buildings in New York lost billions last year and are begging the Rent Guidelines Board for a large increase next year. But tenant advocates say that they still make too much profit. I'm Tony, and this is Real Estate Investing and Landlord News. All right, so I have an interesting article for you today, and it's coming out of New York, and it's all about New York rent control. I've been talking about this for a while because this is one of those things where you can look at their example and see exactly why the rent control doesn't work, why it would be a disaster in the majority of places across the entire country. So now we're in this high inflationary period where the cost of everything has increased. But they have a board called the Rent Guidelines Board up there, and they decide how much a rent increase is going to be. And they don't actually look at how much inflation was, how much costs have increased. Instead, they use their feelings and their personal beliefs of if the tenant is paying too much to make that decision. And the result is disastrous. The result is that they do not give large rent increase allowances to landlords, and landlords, they have to make cuts in other places, particularly in maintenance and capital expenditure. So you have a lot of buildings up in New York that are under rent control that are falling apart. They are dilapidated. They are in horrible shape, and they haven't been updated in 20, 30 years in many cases. And the tenants are not happy with this. They're complaining. They think that, oh, well, landlords are still making so much money. Why aren't they fixing this stuff? Well, you don't know the math. You're the one who wants this cheap rent. You're the one who thinks that, oh, rent control is a good idea. But then you're like, well, why isn't the landlord making any repairs? Well, the rent control is the reason. The cheap rents that you begged for are the reason why landlords are unable to make repairs or unwilling to make repairs. So before I get into the article, go ahead, hit the like and subscribe button, maybe leave a comment down below and let me know what you think. So landlords are going to be asking for a larger rent increase to this Rent Guidelines Board for the upcoming year, right? And I personally don't believe there's any chance that they are going to get it. I don't think that this board they use common sense in any manner. No matter who is appointed to it, this is a political committee. This isn't a committee of business people who understand economics, because if they were, they would give them at least a increase that was on pace with inflation. But they haven't kept pace with inflation in years, even predating the pandemic and all the pandemic eviction restrictions. They were keeping the increases far below actual inflation, and the results have been disastrous for the landlords who have to operate under these rules. So yeah, I mean, I'm a big opponent of rent control or government control of prices in any industry. I think it's horrible. I don't think it's good for consumers, and the long-lasting effects, you know what, somebody's got to pay. That's the truth. No matter if the government says the price is XYZ, well, the cost, the actual pay or the actual cost of this is going to come from somewhere, be it the government, be it from the private property owners, but nothing is free. Absolutely nothing is free. So let's get into this article. This article is coming from therealdeal.com, and it says rent stabilized buildings profits dive a record 9.1%. Share of assets in distress jumps, Rent Guidelines Board. So yeah, the decline in profits is the biggest on record for New York. And it says that the number of buildings that are in distress, where the property owners are in serious financial distress and are facing foreclosure, has increased. So let's read the details. A Rent Guidelines Board report Thursday shows owners' net operating income plummeted 9.1% in 2021 from the previous year, the steepest decline since the Rent Guidelines Board began tracking it in 1990. Net operating income is a proxy for profits, but excludes debt service and capital expenditures. So a positive figure from the rent board doesn't mean a building's revenue is covering its costs. Landlord's previous worst year was 2002, when NOI fell by 8.7%. So as you could tell in the first couple of paragraphs there, they already explained that even if your net operating income is profitable, right? And well, that doesn't mean that your building is actually making money, because that doesn't actually cover the cost of debt service, your loan. Okay. It also doesn't cover the cost of capital expenditures. So you are looking at this one little statistic here, and there could be a great number of landlords who are in distress who, on paper, according to the NOI, look like they aren't doing that bad. So yeah, this is it's bad. It's bad, and there's going to be more properties that are falling into distress, and buildings are going to be in horrible shape. Tenants are going to be whining and complaining. Oh well, why are there roaches and mold and everything bad in my building? Why is this landlord not making these major repairs? Oh, our furnace has been out for weeks. Well, the landlord doesn't make any money. The landlord is going bankrupt because they lost so much money during the pandemic eviction restrictions to tenants who weren't paying rent, and now they can't increase their rents to cover the cost of basic maintenance or of making major repairs. So yeah, what did you expect? Did you expect the landlord to make something out of nothing? No, of course not. And then you have to talk about a lot of the loans that these landlords have are dependent upon them being able to actually make rent increases. And sometimes the banks will say, hey, we won't lend to this landlord because this property is not profitable. It doesn't pin out on paper. So if the banks won't lend to the landlord, well, the landlord could lose the property, especially if they have to refinance. Landlord groups, such as the Community Housing Improvement Program, have continuously sounded the alarm that the rent law, which severely restricted owners' ability to increase revenue, coupled with rising operating expenses and a drop in rent collection, was undermining buildings' finances. Ahead of last year's Rent Guidelines Board vote, tenant advocates dismissed those claims, saying 2020's 8% drop in net operating income was only the fourth decline in 26 years. So yeah, that was after last year. Last year had a huge drop in net operating income, and guess what? Well, this year they had another huge drop in net operating income, and of course the tenant average. Oh no, you're not losing money. Like, I'm sorry, I didn't know I gave my accounting paperwork to this tenant advocate group. I don't remember the tenant advocates coming by and reading through my books. So how do they know how much money I'm making? They don't. They are morons. And this is something I've been talking about for a while. These groups, these politicians, these tenants who think they know the finances of landlords have never seen my paperwork, have never seen any landlord's paperwork. They're guessing. They're like, oh, well, I saw that your rents were high and it looks like you make a lot of money. And it's like, yeah, but you don't know what my expenses are. You don't know how much the utilities cost. You don't know how much my insurance costs. You don't know how much mortgage I pay. You don't know anything, essentially. Only thing you know is how much the rent itself is. That's it. And then you're making a generalized guesstimate of how much profit you think that I'm making, and you have no clue. You have absolutely no clue. And you sit there like a pompous idiot and make these proclamations like you're some sort of a genius. Well, shut up because you are an idiot. But the latest report indicates it was not a blip. It found rental income fell by 1.2% citywide after the rent board extended its 2020 rent freeze. Meanwhile, operating costs jumped by 5.2% in 2021. The 2020 report showed income down 3.8% and operating costs down 2.8%. This report is proof positive that the disinvestment and defunding of New York's rent stabilized housing stock needs to stop, says Jay Martin, CHIP's executive director, said in a statement. Martin called on the board to use the data to set a sustainable rent adjustment that will keep this critical housing stock on the market. The board vote in June will affect leases signed or renewed beginning on October 1st. Last year, the board ignored its own staff's recommendation of a 4.2% hike, and owners requested 6.5% to approve a 3.25% jump on 1 year leases. Tenant advocates had called for a rent freeze or rollback. See, you already understand, right? Now, across the country, everyone knows that inflation has been closer to 9%. Landlords last year in New York of rent controlled buildings had asked for a 6.5% increase. And of course, that wasn't going to happen. So then it says that the Rent Guidelines Board's own staff had recommended a 4.2% increase, and they ignored it because this is like I said, these are politicians or bureaucrats or basically very tenant friendly, very anti landlord people. So they said, no, but that's too high. That's too high. We're only going to give 3.5%, regardless of the fact that actual inflation was closer to 9%. Okay. So as you could tell, there is a nearly 6% discrepancy between reality and what they actually allowed landlords to increase their rents to. But then you read what the tenant advocates said. The tenant advocates wanted a rent rollback. They wanted the rents to decrease. See, that's why you cannot listen to these people because they don't work inside reality. Okay? They work in this fantasy world where someone else is going to be paying their bills for them and the government will take care of them. That's someone else's problem. Everything will be okay. Well, no. This is reality, okay? Landlords in New York are in trouble because they can't pay their bills because they're not able to raise their rents enough to cover their expenses.